In this video, we'll be discussing three different types of loops. We'll be discussing the for in, and for of loops. So let's start off with the classic for loop, which we've gone through in previous videos. So in this example, we want to create a basic for loop that counts from 1 to 5. So this should be pretty straightforward. We create a for loop, we start at the value of 1, and we're going to go until the value of 5, and we're going to increment by 1 each time. And the console will then print number and each value. So let's run this. And this prints out from 1 to 5, which is correct. And this occurs because we are starting at a value of 1, and 1 is less than or equal to 5, so this condition is satisfied. So the number that is printed out is 1 from the console. And then we increment by 1, so 2 is still less than or equal to 5, so this condition is satisfied, meaning that number 2 is printed, and it keeps going until we hit number 5, and that'll still be satisfied because 5 is equal to 5, but then we move up to 6, we increment to 6, and that condition is no longer being satisfied, meaning the loop stops and the program is essentially over. So let's go through another example here, and we want to loop through an array by index for this question. So I'm going to write down the question here, and let me just comment that. Okay, so for this question, we want to write a for loop that prints each fruit in an array and its index in the format index x fruit name. So let's create a constant variable here called fruits, and we want it to hold an array that has apple, banana, cherry, and let's say date. So we want to start at a value of 0 in this case because index 0 holds the first element of the array, and we want to iterate through the entire length of the array, and then we want to increment by 1 each time. So the console is then going to print index I, and we are going to say fruits I. So let's run this, and it prints out index 0 apple, index 1 banana, 2 cherry, 3 date, which is correct. And this occurs because the starting point of 0 allows this condition to be satisfied, so it prints out index 0, fruit with where index 0 is, so that is apple, and then it will iterate to the next value by 1. So index 1 still satisfies this requirement or this condition, so 1 and banana are printed, and it keeps going until the very end of the array, and then the program is done when we have gone through the entire array. So that is how you loop through an array by index. So let's try for in loops now. So we want to loop through object properties. So let me print out an example here, or the question. So let's create an object called student holds or has properties name, age, and major. And what we want to do essentially is we want to print out each object property with its value. So let's create an object here, and we're going to call it student, which has properties name, and we'll say name has a value of Liam, age has a value of 20, and major has a value of computer science. And we'll put a semicolon there. And we're going to say for let key in student. So it's very important to remember this. For the for in loops, they are perfect to use for keys of an object, meaning if you want to access property names and their values, this is very beneficial to use. So let's console.log this, and we're going to say key plus colon, and we're going to say student key. So this will essentially print out each key value here, so name, age, major, and then this will print out each value. So of course it prints out Liam, age 20, major computer science, which is exactly what is shown here. So this works because what we are doing is we are essentially taking the keys, or each property, from student, from the object student, and we are printing out each key value and each property and each value, and it'll go through until each property is printed with its corresponding value. So let's go to another example, and in this example we want to count properties in an object. So let's delete this. So I'm going to write this. So write a for in loop that counts how many keys an object has, essentially. So let me just write in a random object here. So of course it has 3 different properties. So we called this object game settings, and the difficulty is hard, volume is 80, full screen is true. So the output to this should be 3. So let's let count equals 0, because we are starting at a value of 0 for the count. And we're going to say for let key in game settings. So we're essentially taking each property, each key value in game settings, and all we're going to do is we're going to increment the count. So each time a new property is found, we are going to add to it. So we're going to console.log this object has count properties. And we are going to run this, and this object has 3 properties. So of course this occurs because we're starting at count 0, and what we're essentially doing is we're trying to access each key value in game settings, and each key will basically be added each time throughout each iteration. So we're going to go 0, which it starts at, then 1, 2, 3, and then the console will then print out 3 properties, because that is how many properties are within the object. So now let's talk about the for of loop. So the for of loop is quite different to the for in loop. So for of loops go through values of an iterable, like an array or string, and it's clean or easy. There's no need for index numbers. So this is extremely useful for going through arrays and just taking values from that array. So let me write down the question here, and we're going to say use a for loop to print every animal in an array. So let's create an array here that is called const animals, and let's say we're going to write deer, bear, and dog, and we're going to say for let animal of animals. So this basically takes each individual animal, each iteration through the loop, and the console will then print animal, animal, and we're going to run this, and this prints each animal within the array. So animal is representing each separate index within the array. so each separate animal, and then animals represents the entire array. So it iterates through each and every value within the array. So now let's loop through a string. So for this, we're also going to use the for of loop. And for this, we want to loop through the word hello. So we want to loop through the word hello, print each individual letter. So what we want to do in this case is we want to loop through the word hello, and we want to print each individual letter on a separate line. So it should say H-E-L-L-O. So let's define the word, which is hello. And we're going to say for let char, representing each character of word. And the console will then print each individual char. So of course this says L twice because it is the same value. So in my debug console it will always do this, but for some of your debug consoles it will say H-E-L-L-O instead of grouping the two L's together. So this has given us the correct output, and as I mentioned earlier, char represents each individual character within the word, and word represents the entire word that we have defined up here. So let's go through one more example here, and we are going to do this with nested loops, which we have discussed actually in the previous video on this channel. So let's give this a try. So I'm going to write down the question. So we want to write a nested for of loop that prints each student's name and their grades from a list of student objects. So let's give this a try. So let's write, or you know what, I'll actually copy this in. So we're going to say const students equals this, and then we are going to put this inside. Okay, so let's create our for loop. So we have two students. We have Emma, who has good scores, and we have Noah, who has pretty decent scores as well. So we're going to loop through each score. So we want the output to be, you know what, I'll actually show you guys what I want the output to be, so you can try it on your own before I go through this. So pause the video for a second if you want to give this a try, and I'll solve the question now. So this is what we want to output. So we want to have the student name and each of their individual scores on separate lines. So to do this, we want to create a for loop, a for of loop. So we're going to say let student of students, and we're going to console.log the student. So this outer loop is for the student name. So we're going to say student.name to grab that property. And then what we're going to do is we are going to create another for loop, an inner for loop that lets score of scores, student.scores, so it grabs that additional property from within the object, and the console in this case prints dash score colon score. And let's run this, and it gives us our output. So the reason this occurs is because the outer for loop is essentially taking the property name of each student, So it prints the student name, and then because it's taking the student from the object, and then the inner loop is taking the student scores from the object student, and then it's printing out each individual score. So that's how that works. So I hope you learned something new in this video. This is a little bit more of a complex topic that we've discussed today, and we're going to continue doing this and building upon each video throughout this series. So I hope you enjoyed. Please like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you for the next video. Thank you.